Many thanks for joining us. Welcome to Business Incorporated. I am BC Adibayo. On today's program, World Bank appoints 2 vice presidents for Sub-Saharan Africa region. Morocco's trade deficit shrinks by 12% year-on-year in the first 5 months of 2020. Plus, Egyptian parliament approves 80 billion Egyptian pounds supplemental spending bill. But first, let's begin with the markets, and we'll start right from here in Africa, where the numbers were mostly positive at intraday, with South Africa's JSE leading gains by 1.62%, while the NSE gained 0.47%. Elsewhere in Egypt, the EGX 30 was unchanged at intraday, while Kenya closed positive on Wednesday. And most markets in the Gulf region were positive at intraday, with Qatar's blue chip index rising the most by 1.37%, while Saudi's index advanced 0.69%. In the UAE, market sentiments were mixed as the Abu Dhabi index was higher by 0.62%, while Dubai's index shed 0.14%, also at intraday. And in Europe, stocks traded higher this morning as global markets received a boost from news surrounding the development of a potential coronavirus vaccine. Let's cross over to Frankfurt, where Chelsea Delany is standing by to tell us more from the European scene today. Good afternoon, Chelsea. German Chancellor Angela Merkel said she wants to expand gender diversity quotas for German companies. Of course, Germany has had a law requiring diversity on corporate boards since 2015, but it largely failed to achieve results. Why hasn't it worked?
In some sense, it has worked. It has gotten more women on the supervisory boards of German companies. So in Germany, you have 2 different corporate boards. You have a supervisory board, which is made of external board members, people who aren't really working at the company that they're sitting on the board of. And then you have an executive board, which is made up of executives at the company. So when they passed this law in 2015, it was targeted specifically at the supervisory board. So the quota was for 30% of these supervisory boards for the biggest companies in Germany needed to be filled with women. So we have seen an increase in women on supervisory boards. They're now the top companies in Germany, they have just under 30% of those board seats filled by women, but we still haven't seen sort of the progress that people were hoping for. The gains for diversity have really been really only applied to this area that the law covered. So people had hoped when they passed this law that if you put more women in these board seats, that you would see increased diversity within the company itself, more women in executive roles, things like that. But we really haven't seen that at all. There's a big difference between the number of women on the supervisory boards, where there's the mandated quota, and the executive boards where there isn't a quota. So it appears that companies are trying to follow the law, but they really aren't doing much more than is required by the law. So what Merkel and her coalition wants to do is to broaden this law. They, for one, are interested in making this also mandatory on executive boards, which would imply more women in executive roles. But they also want to increase the number of companies that are covered by the law. Right now, it's just the largest companies in Germany, but they want to broaden this out so it would cover hundreds more companies. But what we've seen so far has been a little bit underwhelming, as you said. So it's unclear if even if they do broaden this law, if it will really do much outside of the specific mandates, if it will really lead to widespread change within the ranks of German corporations.
Also, one other issue today is the fact that German unions are protesting outside of Parliament in Berlin today over planned job cuts in the airline industry amid coronavirus travel restrictions. How many jobs are actually at stake here?
It's certainly thousands of jobs. It's a little bit difficult to pinpoint an exact number right now because the way that the union structure works in Germany, if you want to cut jobs, you typically have to negotiate those with unions before you can actually go through with the job cuts. So every airline adjacent industry is obviously really struggling right now. They're looking at several years of curtailed business. So We've heard from basically every airline and every plane maker, every airport, that they are looking at job cuts. In some cases, a significant portion of their employees could be cut. And this is going to fall hard on Germany. We've seen Lufthansa, which is the state airline here, say that they could have to cut up to 22,000 jobs. We've seen EasyJet say that they're going to be cutting hundreds of jobs here in Germany. The Frankfurt airport, plane makers like Boeing and Airbus are going to be cutting thousands of jobs. So there's definitely a lot of potential damage to the labor force here in Germany. And a lot of these unions and a lot of these employees are obviously really upset about this. They've seen just billions of dollars going to companies through the government stimulus efforts. Lufthansa itself has gotten about 9 billion euros from the government, and then they're saying, okay, you're giving so much money to these companies, why aren't our jobs protected? So they are today sort of going to the parliament and asking for lawmakers to really do more to ensure that they aren't losing their jobs through this crisis.
Well, Chelsea, lawmakers are set to discuss today about what went wrong at fintech firm Wirecard, which recently filed for bankruptcy amid allegations of accounting fraud. What are you expecting from this parliamentary hearing?
Well, we got a taste of what it could look like when this session begins in just a few minutes last night, when lawmakers in a closed-door session really grilled the head of the banking regulator, BaFin, here, and also other executives within the financial ministry about sort of all of the failures of oversight. So they are expected to discuss this publicly today and within the parliament, and it's likely to be another tough session for these regulators and for these financial regulators here in Germany, because this has been a really big black eye for Germany. It's exposed a lot of missed red flags within these regulators. It appears that several different regulatory bodies had sort of dropped the ball on all of the red flags at Wirecard. So they obviously have excuses. BaFin is saying that they couldn't regulate Wirecard because it was a tech company, not a bank. So one of the big discussions today is going to be about how they can potentially expand the oversight powers of regulators here in Germany. It's not likely to see any big changes at today's meeting. It's really a first step and one of the first discussions we're seeing among politicians here in Germany. But there is a pretty broad consensus that regulatory powers do need to be strengthened here in Germany, because this has been such a scandal and it's really shaken confidence in German regulatory powers and the German business sphere in general.
All right, Chelsea, thank you for these updates, and we'll see you again tomorrow. Markets in London also began trading in positive territory, with the FTSE 100 gaining about 50 points. Well, let's find out what else is driving the markets today. And Juliana Olayinka is standing by to give us more updates. Good afternoon, Juliana. UK government sources have indicated that dozens of countries will be exempt from a travel quarantine from Monday, and a very long list of countries is likely to be published by the end of this week. Any idea what countries would make the list?
Good afternoon, Bissy. Yes, there are several countries, and this is a big story for Britain and for many countries across the world that rely on money that comes in from British tourists. We're expecting an announcement from the British government perhaps later today, at the latest definitely tomorrow. And it does appear as if foreign holidays have been given the green light. Just a couple of weeks ago, we know there was lots of controversy surrounding the Home Secretary, Priti Patel's plans to make any individual coming into the UK quarantine for 14 days. Some airlines decided they were actually going to take the British government to court, and there were suggestions that it wasn't going to last long, and clearly it's not. Before the announcement, we're expecting what had been spoken about is these air bridges, which would mean Britain would partner up with individual countries. I believe France, Portugal, Italy and Greece were some of them, where tourists from each of those countries wouldn't have to self-isolate for 14 days. But it's gone much further. So there are apparently 75 countries on this list. It goes beyond the EU. The Daily Telegraph are the first publication to be speaking about it. Apparently, again, it's all EU destinations, British overseas territories, Bermuda and Gibraltar, Turkey, Thailand, Australia and New Zealand. Basically all countries that British tourists like to go on. And what we're expecting is that the government will announce that if you are going to be booking your flights to these holidays over the summer, when you come back in Britain, you won't need to self-isolate.
All right, Juliana, this morning you spoke to Chimi about the 6,000 job losses in one day from the UK high streets. Well, there's more bad news as the BOE's latest survey of chief financial officers from small, medium-sized and large companies found that they expect an 11% hit to employment by the end of the year, up from 10% a month ago. What more did that survey find out, and how are the markets reacting to this?
Well, as you said in your leader there, Bissy, the FTSE is actually up, and that's really down to the airline stocks, who are seeing a huge rally due to this announcement that they're expecting to hear from the British government. But this survey, as you said, conducted by the Bank of England, where they were listening to the chief financial officers of about 2,500 companies. Really, what they were saying is nothing new. We know this. This has been repeated again and again. It was repeated yesterday by the Labour opposition leader, Sir Keir Starmer. The Shadow Chancellor, Annalise Dodds, has written an open letter to the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, and the main concern is unemployment. We also heard earlier this week from the Bank of England's chief economist, Andy Haldane, who said that he fears for unemployment. And the labour market has given us this data, even whilst the government is paying for 9 million employees' wages, redundancies are still taking place. So I think, you know, the fact that the surveys are revealing that business owners and chief financial officers are concerned about the labour market is really bang on the money. At intraday, the FTSE All Share is up 0.62%. The FTSE 100 is up by 0.56%, and the FTSE 250 is up by 0.90%. That was the FTSE All Share up at the top. In currencies, the pound is up on the US dollar by 0.29%, down on the euro by 0.01%, and up on the Japanese yen by 0.28%.
But hey, some good news after all from the high street, as Primark is going ahead with plans to open 5 new stores in the US, France and Poland. And that's despite economic uncertainty over the coronavirus pandemic. But this is also coming as other high streets brands are cutting costs and laying off staff. So tell us, what has changed for Primark?
Well, Bissy, as it pertains to these store openings, nothing's changed. This has been a long-term plan for Primark. Of course, there were delays. The coronavirus pandemic delayed them. But this has been a plan that they had forecast for a long time. And now they've told their shareholders that they're going ahead and doing this with these stores across America, France and Poland. As you say, as soon as they made the announcement, Associated British Foods, the umbrella company of Primark, their shares at early trading were up 4.5%. They actually had a trading update this morning, and they did show that they have lost about 2/3 of their income. Of course, unlike all of their competitors, Primark has no online presence. So each month they were locked down. They said that they lost about £650 million worth of sales. But, you know, I saw it myself coming out into the dead centre of London, that the want and the need and the hype around Primark is still very much in existence and in the air. People were queuing by about 5 o'clock in the morning for the reopening of their sites. They say that sales have been very healthy and very welcomed in the couple of weeks that it's been open. So unlike the rest of their competitors and much of the woes facing the high street, Primark and Associated British Foods seem to be rising above it.
All right, Juliana, thanks for the updates. We'll see you again tomorrow. When we return in just a moment, our domestic commodities market update will be up next. Please stay with us. Welcome back. The World Bank says it has appointed 2 vice presidents for the sub-Saharan Africa region In a statement released on Wednesday, the Washington-based International Finance Institution says that Mr. Ousmane Diagana is the second VP with responsibility for Central and Western Africa, while Mr. Ghanem now oversees Eastern and Southern Africa affairs. The bank's portfolio on the sub-Saharan African region was initially presided by one vice president, an Egyptian, Mr. Hafiz Ghanem. The World Bank further explains that the appointment of the two vice presidents is a sign of its strong commitment to Africa, as it plans to lend $50 billion to the countries on the continent this year. Now, our domestic commodities market update is focusing on garlic today. And of course, garlic is widely used as a flavor in cooking, but it has also been used as a medicine throughout ancient and modern history. It's been taken to prevent and treat a wide range of conditions and diseases, and is also a seasonal commodity whose price declined during the harvest period and increases during the planting season. But joining me now to talk about this and more is Aisat Dahoud, a research analyst at the Financial Derivatives Company. Good afternoon, Aisat. Thanks for joining us. So the price of garlic has jumped by 21% to 17,000 naira per bag this year. What's responsible for this price movement?
Yes, the price of garlic have jumped by 21% when it's actually supposed to drop. Because naturally, like you mentioned, during the harvest period, we have lower prices compared to the planting season, which is between November and March. So harvest is usually 4 to 5 months afterward. So, historically, this year's harvest season is different. It is very, very different because the harvest, the supply is now below demand. Demand has grown above the supply. Naturally, the consumption of garlic is wild. So do you recall this grapevine that certain garlic mixture is a possible cure for COVID-19? That was what triggered this increased demand that suppressed supply. And demand growing beyond supply pressures price to come upward. So that's the reason for this aberration.
Now, China is the world's largest producer of garlic, and it controls 80% of the global market. Of course, China has suffered severe supply chain disruption. Can this be partly responsible for the supply-demand imbalance of garlic here in Nigeria?
Supply chain disruption affected a lot of countries. China was the most affected. Being the world's largest producer of garlic, it contributes about 80%. That's about 22 million tons of garlic to the global market. With this, with it being the most disrupted country in terms of supply chain, global output for garlic would be significantly affected. Although in Nigeria, we produce garlic. We produce about 900 tons of garlic. But the amount of garlic available for sale in the global market would drop significantly. Coupled with the abnormal demand I explained earlier, all this explains the market imbalances for garlic in Nigeria.
Of course, Aisat, garlic is a multi-purpose commodity, and it's used as a seasoning or spice among many other uses. And one of its disadvantages, though, is its after-odor effect. But will this not affect the demand for the commodity in spite of the current shortage?
Relatively, some people tend to shy away from garlic because of the pungent smell after consumption. However, garlic the multi-purpose use of garlic and its numerous nutritional values outweighs this disadvantage. So, garlic is used as food flavoring to prevent food poisoning. It's used in herbs to treat flu and the likes. It's even used in the pharmaceutical industry to create food supplements. So, but some people still say that the after-odor effect comes from the raw consumption. But the truth of the matter is, this after-odor effect has always been, and people have been consuming garlic, and they would always continue to consume garlic. So even if the demand is going to decline, it would just decline to resolve this market imbalance. It wouldn't decline as a result of the disadvantage, the after-odor effect.
Aisat Dahoud, research analyst at the FDC. Thanks for speaking with us. More stories now. The Egyptian parliament has approved an 80 billion Egyptian pound supplementary spending bill for the financial year that ended on Tuesday. According to the country's finance minister, the newly approved funds will be used to help pay 102 billion pounds that the electricity ministry owes the petroleum ministry and to pay a 50 billion pound first installment on the 160.5 billion pounds owed to the state pension fund. The 2019-2020 budget had originally allocated a spending of 1.57 trillion Egyptian pounds. The draft of the 2020-2021 budget provides for 1.7 trillion in expenditures. Let's head now to Morocco, where trade deficits shrank by 12% to 73.7 billion dirhams in the first 5 months of 2020 from a year earlier. According to the foreign exchange regulator, imports dropped 16.9% to 174.5 billion dirhams, and exports tumbled 20.1% to 100.8 billion due to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Energy imports, including gas and oil, fell 9.2% to 22.9 billion on the back of lower prices. The drought has slashed Morocco's cereals harvest this year by 42%, leading to a spike in soft wheat imports to 7.8 billion dirhams and barley to 1.8 billion. The automotive sector still tops Morocco's industrial exports despite a drop in the sales by 39.4% to 21.3 billion, while exports and phosphates and byproducts, including fertilizers, fell 1.6%. Kenya's forest region is buckling under the strain of a new generation of locusts that is destroying crops and threatens to spread to neighboring countries imminently. It's planting season in Kenya's Turkana region, but instead of growing, farmers are seeing their crops destroyed by a new swarm of locusts. See this report.
The number of locusts in East Africa exploded in late 2019, exacerbated by unusual weather patterns that had been amplified by climate change. But this generation has hatched in Kenya's poorest region, and the young locusts are eating everything in sight.
In the entire farm, if you go around, the farmers go around, or anyone can go around, you'll find that almost all the tomatoes have been destroyed in this shape.
Turkana is a vast dry scrubland in northwest Kenya that borders Uganda, South Sudan and Ethiopia. Daniel Kurura, head of UN's Food and Agriculture Organization in Turkana, where 20 million people were already struggling for food, says the locusts are destabilizing an already bad situation. But he also warns that within a week, wings could mature, meaning they'll be able to travel up to 80 miles a day.
Prayer is that we try to arrest that, because they can go and cause problems in other countries and other regions. So our wish is to control them before they leave Turkana County.
He says his teams are working frantically to spray the locusts with insecticide before they become airborne, while the farmers use tin drums to scare the locusts away from their dwindling crops.
And that's where we end today's program. Thank you for watching. I am BC Adebayo.